To help explain further this whole notion of dualisms and the spaces of coexistence, here is a short animation from the makers of South Park. And don't worry, this is a family-friendly animation. And it's it's an animation of Alan Watts and one of his, he's a theological philosopher, and he talks about dualisms in this clip. Okay, so this whole concept of prickly goo and gooey prickles, the big fancy word for it is a dialectic. So when I throw out, this is a $100 word. When I throw out dialectic, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's about the dualisms actually persisting together. So in my research, I was looking at the relationship of people and objects. My program was in product design and industrial design, so I was really concerned about the thing. Although the framework I'm going to talk about today actually applies to print, to interactive, to things, and so forth. One of the first essays or pieces of discourse about the relationship of people and things comes from John Locke. And it's not John Loss Locke, it's John Social Contract Locke. And what Locke says is that as humans go through the environment, we encounter raw materials, and we start imbuing these raw materials with labor. And the more labor that we put into the materials, we start creating a relationship between the people and the object. And what he characterized this relationship as was the concept of possession. And so he built the whole, this is one of the facets of the social contract that Locke talks about. There's another piece of literature that talks about the relationship of people and things, and this one's a bit more current. It's by a California linguist named Richard Ogle, and in his book Smart World, he describes a scene from the Tom Hanks movie Apollo 13, and in it, Hanks's character is out in space, and he's performing calculations with pencil and paper to calculate the trajectory to save the lives of him and his crew. And he's radioing down these calculations back to a room full of engineers. And the engineers are all performing the exact same calculations to confirm the outcome. And the one difference between what Hanks's character was doing and what the engineers were doing was that they were performing the calculations using slide rules. And so what Ogle suggests is that amount of cognition, that amount of intelligence that Hanks was using to perform the calculations was actually embedded in the object of the slide rule. And so Ogle suggests that objects have a kind of embedded intelligence. And he later goes on with all these theories about how collections of objects create what he calls idea spaces. And he has a whole theory of creativity around it. But basically, the salient point of this is that objects have a kind of embedded intelligence. Now, hang on to that. I'll put that on the back burner for a second, because at this point in my research, it was feeling very gooey, and I knew that when I went back to Redmond and dealing with a lot of prickly types, that just talking about these kind of gooey philosophical things might not go over very well. So taking advantage of the fact that we had cross-registration with MIT, I went down the street to where there were a lot of engineers and decided to kind of test these ideas against a more prickly sort of audience. And one of the people that I studied with at MIT was Marvin Minsky. And Minsky, who aside from being one of the pioneers in artificial intelligence, he was actually Stanley Kubrick's science advisor in the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was a pretty interesting lecture. And in his course, we read his latest book called The Emotion Machine, in which he talks about theories around cognition and emotion. And Minsky rejects a dualism of rational thought and emotional thought. But one of the presumptions that we have is that emotion is the opposite or something separate from rational approaches to design. And what Minsky suggests is that there's a dialectic around thought. The rational thought and emotions are really just ways of thinking, and mechanically they're the same. And so if we bring back Ogle's idea of objects having a kind of embedded intelligence, well then I assert that objects can also have embedded emotions. And this goes on to explain our relationship with objects, things like Lucky Charms or souvenirs, things that we have these irrational connections with in our everyday lives. In fact, one anecdotal example is the company iRobot that makes Roomba robotic vacuum cleaners. They were being interviewed on NPR, and the president was talking about this one instance where a family had sent in their Roomba to be repaired. And iRobot, being a good company, suggested that they'll just send the family a brand new one, and they'll fix the one that they sent in and sell it as refurbished. Well, the family protested. They said, no way. Their member of the family had been living with them for several months, and that they wanted that member to come back to them. So again, this is a robotic vacuum cleaner that they had come to think of as a member of their family. Well, this raises the question too, what are emotions? And Minsky always said the simplest questions have the most complex answers, and vice versa. For example, all of physics could be boiled down to a few rules. And the field of psychology kind of suffers from a bit of physics envy in the sense that there have been attempts in psychology to boil down the human psyche to a manageable number of rules. I think the best attempt got down to like 6,600 rules. And with that, there are many theories of emotion. But the one that I'm going to talk about today is something called the James Long theory of emotion. And this is named after William James, the American psychologist, and Carl Long, the Danish physiologist. And I just bring that up because when I first heard about it, I was like, who's James Long? And there is no James Long, it's the two guys. And so this is where it's starting to get to be about the opposite. The way we think about emotion is kind of like a label. So to help better explain this, the common sense theory of emotion, the Cannon-Bard theory, the common sense theory of emotion goes something like this, which is I'm walking through the woods and I see a bear. And as a result, I'm scared. And my body reacts to this fear by increasing my adrenaline, increasing my blood pressure, and telling me to run.